People who've lost everything salvage what they can from a pile of smouldering hot rocks. A few days ago, this was a river of lava. It came gushing out of Mount Nyiragongo, Africa's most active volcano, into the city of Goma in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Samuel Kambale's neighbourhood is gone. His house caught fire before it was engulfed. All that's left are the charred remains of a tree he once planted to mark his land.
The volcano was lighting up. It was a panic almost everywhere. So I took my family, put them on my motorbike, and sent them into town. I stayed behind to keep an eye on the situation.
People we spoke to who evacuated early say their houses were looted. That's why some stayed, to protect homes and livelihoods until the last minute. Not everyone got away in time. Muhindo Binyeni Nicola has been missing since the eruption. He used to trade groceries on the street from a stall just like this one. He's a young man in his early 20s. His family put up the posters around the neighbourhood. He lived in a home just down here, and their fear is that he was engulfed by the river of lava when it came crashing through the city. And now it's turned into a pile of sharp, heavy rocks. It seems the chances of finding him now are slim. Since the initial eruption, new earth tremors started, and they just haven't stopped. Adalbert Muhindo and his team of volcanologists have been monitoring them. He's barely slept for the last week. Tremors came before the past eruptions. They're trying to work out why, this time, they started after.
Late at night, we started feeling the strong ones. On the day of the eruption, there was no sign of tremors. Nobody felt it. It was that night and the following day when people started feeling those earthquakes.
Nobody knows if that means another eruption is coming, so parts of the city have been declared a red zone. More than 400,000 people have fled to other towns. Many of them are sleeping rough.
We left as the authorities told us to. When we arrived, the first problem was no food and no water, so we decided to come back. Then we found that everything had been stolen from our house. So we are going to stay in this red zone, whatever will happen. We prefer to die here instead of going somewhere else.
The province has been under the control of a military governor for the past 3 weeks because of ongoing conflict with armed groups in the countryside. The army has said help is on its way to the displaced people. Swathes of the countryside and parts of the city have been devastated. Nobody knows if it's over yet or not. Malcolm Webb, Al Jazeera, Goma in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
David Rothery is a professor and volcanologist at the Open University. He says Nyiragongo remains dangerous.
There have been quite a lot of earthquakes which are associated with the movement of magma or lava underground, and it's not quite clear where, if anywhere, that lava will emerge, but there are fissures opening. So the main event at Nyiragongo is not yet over. There's magma underground, which as it rises to the surface because it's hot and buoyant, it fractures the rock, and that's what causes the earth tremors. And this may break out high on the mountain and come downhill really quickly, or it may break out right under the city and not spread very fast, but it will be right in town already. And maybe the worst possible scenario is lava emerges on the floor of a neighbouring lake. This is Lake Kivu, one of the African Great Lakes. It may be a stratified lake with a lot of carbon dioxide gas at the bottom of the lake, which if that gets overturned and degasses, you have a lot of suffocating gas released. Some of the eruptions from the volcano's summit are explosive, so that throws ash particles, that's tiny fragments of rock into the air. It's called volcanic ash. And that's dangerous to breathe. There are also the earth tremors. Some buildings are damaged already. It won't take much of an earth tremor to bring them down again. So buildings that are already damaged are vulnerable to further earthquakes. And then there's a risk of carbon dioxide gas, which will collect in the low points of the topography. That will be right along the lake shore. So it's not a happy place to be.
Traffic jams in Goma as residents flee amid continued seismic activity from nearby Mount Nyiragongo. Congolese authorities ordered the evacuation of 10 city districts Thursday, citing unpredictable magma underneath both Goma itself and nearby Lake Kivu. the city's volcano observatory has warned of a potential looming catastrophe, a limnic eruption, the sudden release of a vast cloud of CO2 dissolved in a lake with the potential to asphyxiate tens of thousands of people. Seismic shocks have already destroyed a number of Goma's buildings, with worrying cracks in city streets widening on Wednesday.
Yesterday it was very small. Here it is, just opposite my house. Today it's widened. We're really scared. We don't know what to do.
The city of 1.5 million people lies roughly a dozen kilometers from Nyiragongo. Since the latest eruption began on May 22nd, the volcano has already spewed 2 rivers of lava, one of which destroyed multiple villages before coming to a halt on the city's edge. The ongoing disaster has made humanitarian aid increasingly necessary while also making it harder to deliver. The UN has some 2,500 staff members in Goma. It's now relocating half of them out of the city as a precaution.
The Goma airport is a very important humanitarian hub for us and for all of eastern Congo. It provides humanitarian assistance to more than 10 million people, and for the moment, it's shut down.
More than 30 people have already been killed, with dozens still missing. The UN says some 20,000 have been left homeless.
The dust has barely begun to settle in Goma following Saturday's volcanic eruption, and this is a community that's also been shaken every 10 to 15 minutes in the past couple of days by a series of powerful aftershocks.
Nous sommes tellement inquiets, on ne sait pas à quoi s'attendre. Donc nous vivons dans une incertitude vraiment atroce. Avec les tremblements de terre qui s'accroissent du jour au lendemain, on ne sait pas réellement qu'est-ce qu'on va faire.
Experts have also been trying to abate the concerns raised by the appearance of 2 major cracks that run for several hundred meters, one near the city's main hospital, the other near the airport.
Nous sommes convaincus que ça ne va pas continuer. Et on continue à suivre. Les dégâts matériels sont énormes.
This may not look very tasty to some people, but there are those who say it's the food of the future. Take 25-year-old Remco Mensing, for example. He turned an old pig farm into a vertical farm for mealworms. They are used for pet food, but as soon as their new housing is finished, they may soon find their way to kitchens all over Europe.
Nutritional values of the mealworms are really good. They're low in fat and they have a lot of protein. And producing the mealworms has a very small footprint, both in carbon emissions, energies. It doesn't take a lot of energy to produce them.
Well, it's a small nuttery flavor, but if you put some salt in it, you get extra flavor from it.
As a chef, he has been teaching people how to use insects in their dishes. After frying some crickets, he uses them for a salad with fermented tomato and paprika.
I'm gonna make desserts of small triabolo worms with some apple and then some raspberries and white chocolate cream.
Fine dining on beetles, crickets or worms, for many in this part of the world this may be too exotic. Experts call this the yuck factor, and this chef doesn't believe that insects for human consumption will soon become very popular. But I can assure you that this cricket salad is very tasty.
The worms are more expensive than beef because of the cost of the production. Yeah, it's not the normal thing that the Dutch eat. But yeah, they have to get used to it, and
they prefer cheese.
They prefer cheese, yeah, and all different kind of meats, also vegetables, of course.
This is being used in shakes and beverages. It contains up to 80% protein.
This is all made from buffalo beetles. After the mealworm, this insect is also being considered as novel food by the European Food and Safety Agency. The company says there's a way to convince people to eat insects, and that is not to show them as insects.
It's not the way it should be presented. We do not ask people to eat whole insects. That is what's different, and that needs to change, and that's also a change that needs to happen in the mindset of food-producing companies.
Heavy rain and high tides batter the eastern states of Odisha and West Bengal, severe weather caused by Cyclone Yas.
I have never seen such a storm in my life, in the last 30-40 years. My house is here. I am witnessing this for the first time. The water may cross the main road for the first time in Digha.
West Bengal's government says 300,000 homes have been damaged. In one of its worst affected districts, South 24 Paraganas, Najma Bibi says she has nothing left. She and her son moved to a safe area, and now her home is destroyed. More than 2 million people have been moved from low-lying areas of West Bengal and Odisha to emergency shelters.
We are inside a shelter, sleeping by putting papers on the ground. Our situation is really bad.
Health experts are concerned about the conditions in evacuation centres as India battles a devastating second wave of the coronavirus.
So the cyclone is certainly going to affect the COVID containment measures, and the cyclone shelters are going to be potential areas that could actually enhance the spread.
Cyclone Yas has weakened, but it's expected to cause severe flooding across many eastern states. Elizabeth Puranam, Al Jazeera, New Delhi.
Off to India now. Thousands of patients are contracting a rare and potentially fatal infection. It's called black fungus. The illness, which can affect the sinuses, lungs, or skin, has about a 50% mortality rate. The country is still grappling, of course, with a deadly wave of coronavirus infections, and doctors say many of the black fungus cases are happening in people who have recovered from COVID-19. Sautik Biswas has been reporting on this. He is an India correspondent for BBC News Online. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. So what do we know about how people are contracting this black fungus infection?
So we have about roughly more than 11,000 cases in the last couple of months that have been reported and a few hundred deaths. Most of these people who contracted this infection are diabetics. They were also on high doses of steroids because they were COVID patients, and they was basically immunocompromised. So it's kind of a triple whammy of being down with COVID, and then you are immunocompromised, and then you are steroids, or you're on steroids, and then you're a diabetic. So basically, this has reduced their immunity to a large extent, and they become very susceptible to this fungal infection.
For the past month, Shiv Pillai and his wife Vitu have been selling coconut water to earn a living. It is a new endeavour for the couple, who are expecting their first child in September. Shiv had been working in the car showroom nearby when Delhi's regional government imposed a lockdown which forced all shops selling non-essential items to close.
It doesn't compare to what I earned earlier, but the company won't give the salary and we have to run our house, pay our rent and take care of our daily expenses. You can imagine how cash-strapped we are that my wife comes here to help me in her condition.
Shiv used to earn $275 a month. Now his earnings depend on how many coconuts he sells. This is the Kisse Kahaniya NGO, which has been helping Shiv and Vitu with food rations and many others who've lost their jobs. Research by one of India's leading universities, Azim Premji, found that lockdowns in the past year have pushed more than 230 million Indians into poverty, which is defined as earning less than $5 a day.
A new study out of the UK found people who suffered from mild cases of COVID-19 still had immune cells in their bone marrow months after the infection. It included 19 patients and did not look at people who suffered moderate or severe symptoms. But the co-author of the study said that these cells will live and continue to produce antibodies for the rest of the person's life.
Today's Perspective guest believes that there's a nugget of hope buried amid the doom and gloom of the coronavirus pandemic. Bella Lack thinks the health crisis is a golden opportunity for us to clean up our act and the planet. She joins us now from London. Bella, thank you very much for being with us here on France 24. First of all, what's the main message that you're hoping to get across? What should this page-turner moment be as we start to think about a post-COVID-19 world?
Well, I think, the coronavirus crisis has been a catastrophe, but in it, there was sort of this nugget of hope because many of us hadn't realized the effect of our disconnection from nature and from the environment. And when suddenly the whole world was struck down by this pandemic that originated because of our destruction of nature and because of the fact that we were encroaching upon rainforests and, supporting the illegal wildlife trade, many people had to realize suddenly that actually we can't continue like this and that this isn't just affecting some abstract future generation or someone in a remote country. This is actually affecting everyone, and everyone is going to feel the impacts, not at some time in the future, but now. And I think it also showed us that, bubbles of privilege aren't going to protect anyone, and that we have to take concrete action as fast as possible.
Mark, what's on the president's agenda over these next 2 days?
Well, Delano, he is scheduled to arrive in the next few minutes here at Union Buildings, the seat of the South African presidency. He will be received for a very solemn ceremony because this is a state visit. There will be a 21-gun salute and the national anthems of France and South Africa will be played. Then he will have a one-to-one meeting with South Africa's president, Cyril Ramaphosa. But this is not about pomp and just a state visit. This is about the fight against coronavirus and more broadly the fight against disease on African soil. The French president and the South African president will launch an initiative, a multilateral initiative supported by Germany, the World Bank, to boost vaccine production on the continent. There's not enough vaccine production on the continent for COVID, of course, to begin with, but also other vaccines. And so there's a willingness really to focus on this issue to show that this visit is about practical results, and the French president is also using this as a way to answer the plea from South Africa's president to lift intellectual rights for the COVID vaccines as a way to boost production. We know the French president agrees in theory, but he says that's not good enough. If you want vaccines, you need to be able to manufacture them, and it starts today, and it needs to happen not only in Europe, not only in Asia, not only in America, but also here in Africa.
Patrick, the Chinese government has had a harsh reaction to the ordering of this report, haven't they?
Yeah, and that's no surprise. China has bristled at the so-called lab leak theory and said that there's no truth or no possibility to that whatsoever, and has also accused others of political manipulation and the blame game as well. Notably, the Chinese embassy in Washington has also made the suggestion that perhaps all secretive labs around the world should be investigated. But of course, that ignores the fact that we know that coronaviruses were being studied. Studies were being conducted at the WIV on coronaviruses. And of course, Wuhan is where the first cases of COVID-19 were first detected. And it's the first sort of concentration of the virus that we've seen as well. So that, as I say, ignores that important fact. China, though, says that, look, this is all detracting from efforts to get COVID-19 under wraps. It's undermining those efforts. But a lot of people would also say, well, look, China's been undermining efforts to try and find the source of the virus, and that has been a problem all along.
And Patrick, what is China's official stance on the origins of COVID-19?
Well, China has been open to all possibilities, except, of course, for that lab leak theory. And it has pushed really quite vigorously this idea that it may have been imported via the cold food chain as well. But look, I mean, I think China is generally open to any possibility that it may have happened outside of China, and so that's, most likely that the disease jumped from an animal. But it's also very strongly pushed the suggestion that the next phase of investigations needs to move beyond China. And that's been problematic because of these two recent Wall Street Journal reports, which have suggested that the lab leak theory can't be ruled out, and also suggested that China has been suppressing information as well.
Patrick, thank you very much for that. Patrick Fox reporting there from Beijing.
Another day of violence in Colombia's anti-government protests 1 month after they began. Videos widely shared on the internet show civilians shooting live rounds on protesters in the city of Cali, with the police apparently doing nothing to stop them. An attorney general's investigator on his day off allegedly shot and killed 2 protesters there, but was then attacked and lynched by demonstrators. Similar scenes in the city of Popayan with fires and repeated explosions. President Iván Duque traveled to Cali Friday evening and announced a full militarization of the city.
We are acting in defense of all people's rights, and starting tonight, we begin the maximum deployment of military assistance to the national police in the city of Cali.
Demonstrators were marking a month of protest that has roiled the country, causing shortages and further hurting an economy decimated by the coronavirus pandemic. A violent police response that has killed dozens has only helped fuel the demonstrations. Yet despite the violence, rallies elsewhere were peaceful, like in the capital Bogotá, where concerts and cultural acts marked the day.
Colombia has some deep and serious structural problems of inequality that are getting worse, and the ghost of our violent past is back again. We want change. The government is not listening to the people, and so we remain on the streets.
Negotiations between the government and protest leaders have made little progress, and analyst Ariel Avila says politics might be the reason why.
First, we are 1 year from the elections, and the government's party has sunk in the polls. They think that if these intermittent protests continue, they will convince middle and upper class Colombians to vote for them again. So the government doesn't want to negotiate. Second, there is a growing split between the unions and the people on the streets who don't recognize them as leaders. And third, there is the clear deterioration of the situation, with police abuses and growing violent acts in the streets that make negotiations difficult.
The risk of a violent escalation in many parts of the country is becoming increasingly real, and neither the government nor the leaders of the protests seem to have an easy solution at hand for a crisis that could further spiral out of control. Alessandro Ampieti, Al Jazeera, Bogotá.
As we mark Jewish Heritage Month on CBSN, we acknowledge anti-Semitism is a growing problem in the United States. One of the places it's most prevalent is online. According to the Anti-Defamation League, the number of anti-Semitic incidents reported online surged by 71% during the 11-day conflict between Israel and Hamas. In the weeks following the violence in the Middle East, anti-Semitic incidents reported to the ADL increased by 75%. This spread of hate online and in person is prompting new concerns in Washington. The Biden administration is meeting with leaders of several Jewish advocacy groups for a second time this week. Advocates are asking the White House to ramp up efforts to help protect the Jewish community in response to the spike in hate crimes.
It's become an almost nightly occurrence for nearly a month. Police clashing with Colombia's youth, angry with a government and a system they say has failed them. During the day at the so-called Resistance Portal in Bogotá, where they gather, 21-year-old Meji is painting a message calling for an end to police violence. But her list of grievances against the government is long.
It's the injustice in this country, the lack of opportunity for many young Colombians. Many can't access education at all. So we're here exercising our right to protest. We're here demanding health, a home, and an education. But we're attacked by the police. The police is armed while we have brushes and paint.
Like practically a third of Colombia's youth, Meji is jobless and has been unable to continue her languages studies. Youth unemployment and school dropout rates have skyrocketed during the COVID pandemic, increasing the numbers of disaffected young Colombians who've responded by protesting despite a brutal police response that has left dozens dead.
They call us Nini or neither nors because we don't work nor study. But how are we supposed to study if we don't have the resources? How can we access public university if there are 5,000 people for 100 spots? There are so many like me who simply don't have anybody to help them pay for an education. I think they took so much away from us that we don't fear them anymore. And if we don't fear them, they lose their power.
The government has begun negotiating with the unions that started the protests in April against a now withdrawn tax reform to address these issues. But many engaging daily here in sit-ins and performances say they don't feel represented by the unions and want their own seat at the table. Protest, they say, is their only available weapon.
At night, the atmosphere remains communal and festive, but as the hours pass, tension rises as protesters block the roads, challenging the police.
Minutes later, security forces move in for another long night of rocks, tear gas, and violence.
We want to be recognized and we want to prosper, and we're willing to fight for it till the end.
No one knows what the end looks like in a country that seems to be repeating its history of repression of protest and dissent. But despite the police efforts, these young protesters say they are determined to hold their ground. Alessandro Ampietti, Al Jazeera, Bogotá.
Computers smashed, equipment stolen, a place of learning destroyed. This is just one of many schools which, according to a report by Human Rights Watch, has been damaged by both government and opposition forces during fighting in the Tigray region of northern Ethiopia. The organisation accuses government troops of using a high school as a military base.
A key part of this is obviously going to be ensuring accountability for the abuses which these communities have seen happen. As I said, there is a real fear of returning to school because forces that have abused and have destroyed these schools are still around.
Fighting began in Tigray 6 months ago. That's when the Ethiopian government, backed by its ally Eritrea, launched a military operation accusing the Tigray People's Liberation Front of attacking its federal military bases in the north and destabilizing the country. The US has been a strong ally of Ethiopia's government for years, but is growing frustrated with the scale of the fighting and widespread reports of sexual violence. The Senate's Foreign Relations Committee was told on Thursday that an estimated 2 million people have been forced to flee their homes and 5.2 million people are in urgent need of assistance.
The United States condemns in the strongest terms the brutal killings, sexual violence, including gang rape, forced removals, wanton destruction of civilian property.
US President Joe Biden has called for an immediate ceasefire. The Senate has unanimously called for the withdrawal of Ethiopian troops, and Secretary of State Antony Blinken says what is happening amounts to ethnic cleansing. Ethiopia has been warned that it faces strong economic sanctions if the fighting continues, but it has dismissed US interference in its internal affairs. The Red Cross, which is supplying food to around 40 villages in the north, says farming essentials like seeds and fertilizer are running low.
The situation has hurt us a lot. We all left our homes with nothing, and our children have been exposed to different diseases. There's no school. All the children and women are hiding in the mountains.
The United Nations says people in Tigray are facing famine if the fighting doesn't stop.